My name is Lillian Brooks. For 15 years, I dedicated my life to Winslow and Colonel, a mid-sized logistics company in Pennsylvania. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't loud. I simply showed up every day, did my work better than anyone else, and built the quiet trust of every major client we had. I started as a junior account manager, fresh out of community college, while others chased big dreams in shiny offices. I stayed grounded. Clients liked my patience. They liked that I remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and details about their kids without being prompted. Year after year, my portfolio grew. My loyalty became an unspoken rule in the company. If Lillian handled it, it got done. Until Owen Ramsey walked in. Owen arrived in early spring, right after our old regional director, Mr. Foster, retired. We were told Owen was young blood, a new direction for Winslow and Colonel's future. They dressed it up in flowery emails and smiling headshots, but the truth spread like smoke through a dry forest. He was here to shake things up. He was here to clean house. The first time I met him, he barely glanced at me. I extended my hand in the conference room. He left me hanging, adjusting his cufflinks instead. Sharp suit, sharp jaw, sharper tongue. "You're Lillian, right?" he said, skimming a paper. "You've been here, what, forever?" I smiled politely. 15 years, sir." He laughed under his breath. "Impressive. Most people burn out long before that." I tucked my hands into my lap and said nothing. In that moment, I knew exactly who he was. A man who saw age as a weakness. A man who believed experience was a weight, not a weapon. Still, I kept my head down. I continued managing my accounts. I fielded emails. I soothed clients when Owen's abrupt leadership style rattled them. It wasn't enough. The morning it happened was a Wednesday. A gray, rainy day where even the coffee tasted tired. Owen called me into his glass-walled office. No warning, no reason. He didn't offer a seat. He didn't close the door. Instead, in front of half the floor, who could clearly see us through the glass, he said, loud enough for the room to hear, "We're making changes, Lillian. It's time for younger blood to step up. Consider this your notice, effective immediately." The air left my lungs. I stared at him, steady. I could feel the eyes on me from beyond the glass. Coworkers frozen, pretending not to listen. I did not cry. I did not beg. I smiled. A small, knowing smile. Because Owen Ramsey, in all his arrogance, had not bothered to read my contract. And tomorrow, in front of the entire board, he would realize exactly what, and who, he had just lost. I did not pack up my desk that Wednesday afternoon. Owen expected a scene, I think. Tears, maybe. Or at least a slumped figure retreating down the long hall with a cardboard box in hand. Instead, I returned calmly to my chair. I logged a few final client notes into our CRM system, replied to 2 emails, and filed a monthly report I knew the board would soon need. I wasn't doing it for Owen. I was doing it for me, for the woman I had always been, no matter who tried to erase her. By 4 o'clock, whispers floated across the office like dandelion seeds. "Did you hear what he did? They fired Lillian? But why her?" It surprised me how quickly the news spread. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't anyone's best friend at the office. I had never needed to be. My work spoke for itself. But it seemed my quiet presence had built something stronger than I realized. Respect. Around 5, Claire Myers, one of the senior financial controllers, approached my desk. Claire was a tough woman, the kind who never wasted a word. "Lillian," she said, voice low, "if you need a reference or anything." I smiled warmly. "Thank you, Claire, but I'm not going anywhere. Not yet." She raised a brow, but said nothing, sensing there was more beneath my words. There was. Years ago, after the company survived a particularly ugly legal battle with a former VP, Winslow and Colonel implemented new protective clauses for employees over 10 years of service. A safety net, ironclad severance agreements, buyout terms, protections against wrongful dismissal without cause. They wanted to prevent lawsuits, and honestly, they wanted to keep people like me, steady hands in storms. I had signed my last updated contract 3 years ago. I doubted Owen had read it. He was too busy polishing his image, too busy deciding which seasoned employees made him look dated by comparison. The clause was simple. Any termination without cause required a 12-month severance package equal to salary plus full benefits. The terminated employee had the right to challenge the dismissal before the board of directors. If the dismissal was found to be unjustified, the employee could request reinstatement or an agreed-upon settlement at triple the severance rate. Triple. Owen had not just fired an employee. He had triggered a financial obligation that could gut his quarterly bonuses and tarnish his first big leadership role permanently. And tomorrow, at the scheduled quarterly board meeting, he would learn that. At home that night, I poured a cup of tea and pulled out my folder, the one I kept with every signed contract, every email trail regarding performance reviews, every positive client testimony I had quietly filed away over the years. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was the delicious, cold clarity of a woman who had been underestimated for the last time. Tomorrow, I would walk into that boardroom not as someone fired, but as someone holding receipts. And Owen Ramsey was about to find out just how expensive arrogance could be. I did not sleep much that night, but it was not from anxiety. My mind was sharp, focused, cataloging every detail, every step I needed to take. By morning, the weather had shifted. A clean blue sky stretched over the city like a fresh canvas. I took it as a sign. When I arrived at the office, there was a buzz in the air. People glanced at me with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Some looked away quickly, uncomfortable. Others, like old Mr. Colton from compliance, offered me a brief, respectful nod. I nodded back. I didn't need their pity. I wasn't the one who should be worried. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. By 9:30, the senior leadership team was already assembling in the main conference room, a gleaming space with glass walls and a polished oak table that could seat 20. I waited outside, calm, watching through the glass as Owen held court at the head of the table. His voice carried, confident and loud, as he shook hands and passed out printed quarterly summaries. No doubt painting himself as the bold, brave new leader, cutting out dead weight. At 9:45, I walked to the executive assistant's desk. Margaret, a quiet woman who had worked for the board chairman for over a decade. "Margaret," I said kindly, "could you let Mr. Godfrey know that I'll need 5 minutes during today's session? I believe I have a contractual matter that requires the board's attention." Margaret, ever discreet, didn't ask questions. She simply picked up the phone, murmured a few words, and then looked at me. "He says to come in when they begin discussing personnel updates, around 10:15. "Thank you." I turned, walking back to my desk. I could feel Owen's gaze burning into my back through the glass. He knew I was supposed to be gone, vanished, erased. Yet here I was, calm, deliberate, unafraid. The minutes crawled until 10:15. Then Margaret gave me the small nod we had agreed upon. I picked up the neatly organized folder from my desk and walked, not hurriedly, not timidly, to the conference room. The door opened with a soft whoosh as I stepped inside. Conversations faltered. Every head turned. Owen's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened where they gripped the armrests. I smiled politely at the board. "Good morning," I said, voice clear. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding my status with the company. If I may, I'd like to present some information for your review." Chairman Godfrey, a stern but fair man in his 60s, gestured to the open seat at the end of the table. "Go ahead, Ms. Brooks." I walked the length of the room, heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and placed a copy of my documents in front of each board member. Owen did not move to stop me. He couldn't. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. As I returned to my seat, I caught Owen's reflection in the glass wall, the first flicker of real fear crossing his polished exterior. I sat down, folded my hands neatly on the table, and waited. The storm had only just begun. Chairman Godfrey adjusted his glasses and began to read. The other board members, Mr. Holloway from Finance, Mrs. Durant from Operations, and Mr. Lowe from Legal, flipped through the pages with growing interest. I watched them carefully, noting the tightening of brows, the subtle shifts in posture. Owen sat motionless, but his face betrayed him. The confident smirk he wore earlier was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. A man trying desperately to calculate how badly he had misjudged the situation. Chairman Godfrey cleared his throat. "Ms. Brooks, you are referring here to your contract, specifically Section 12, Paragraph 4. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," I said, keeping my voice even. The clause covering employees with more than 10 years of service, outlining severance terms and board review procedures in the event of termination without cause. He nodded. "And your termination occurred yesterday, without prior notice? Without performance-based justification?" "Yes, sir," I said again. There were no warnings, no write-ups, no discussions regarding any concerns about my work. Mrs. Durant leaned forward. "And you have documentation of your recent performance reviews?" I slid another folder across the table. "Consistent exceeds expectations ratings for the past 6 years. Signed by previous management." The room grew very still. Finally, Mr. Lowe, the legal counsel, spoke. His tone was neutral, but firm. "Mr. Ramsey," he said, turning his gaze toward Owen, "were you aware of the terms outlined in Ms. Brooks's contract prior to executing her termination?" Owen hesitated. I was briefed on general HR policy, but I wasn't familiar with every individual legacy contract." Mr. Lowe's eyes narrowed slightly. "It was your responsibility to be familiar with all personnel matters affecting your region, especially when making unilateral termination decisions." Owen bristled. "I made a decision in the best interest of the company. We need to modernize." "This is not about modernization," Chairman Godfrey interrupted sharply. "This is about compliance and cost." Owen opened his mouth, then shut it again. Chairman Godfrey turned back to me. "Ms. Brooks, what remedy are you seeking?" I took a slow breath. "I am formally requesting enforcement of my severance terms as outlined in my contract," I said. "Additionally, given the unjust nature of my dismissal, I am exercising my right to petition for either full reinstatement or a negotiated settlement at triple the severance amount." The board members exchanged glances. Triple. The word hung in the air like a hammer about to fall. It was not just a financial penalty. It was a statement. An admission of wrongdoing they would have to document, something that could impact the merger talks we all knew were quietly in the works with a larger logistics firm out of Chicago. Mrs. Durant leaned back in her chair, studying me. There was something almost approving in her gaze. Chairman Godfrey nodded slowly. "We will review your petition and respond formally by end of day tomorrow." He turned to Owen, voice like steel. "Until further notice, Mr. Ramsey, you are suspended from all personnel decisions, pending internal review." Owen's face darkened. I stood, gathered my papers, and gave a polite nod. "Thank you for your time." As I walked from the room, I felt every eye following me. But this time, it was not pity or curiosity that followed. It was respect. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel it. By the end of that day, the company buzzed with barely contained rumors. Owen's door stayed firmly shut, blinds drawn. It did not take long for people to notice. Margaret at the front desk whispered at first that there had been a situation during the board meeting. By the time the afternoon coffee pots had gone cold, everyone knew something big had happened, and they knew I was at the center of it. The strangest thing was how differently people looked at me now. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the safe background figure everyone assumed would just absorb the chaos around her. I had stepped forward, and the ripple effect was undeniable. Still, I kept my head down. I worked through my final client notes, wrapped up loose files, and prepared for whatever came next. I wasn't naive. I knew winning the respect of the board didn't mean the battle was over. The real test would be how they handled Owen. Late in the afternoon, I received a message to meet privately with Mr. Lowe from legal. I found him waiting in one of the small glass conference rooms, a thick folder in front of him. "Ms. Brooks," he said, standing briefly before gesturing to a seat. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, sitting opposite him. "I want to be direct," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The board has reviewed your petition. Based on the documentation provided, there's no question that your dismissal violated the terms of your contract." He tapped the folder lightly. "Given the financial impact of a triple severance payout and the current sensitivity of our pending merger negotiations, the board would like to resolve this matter swiftly and discreetly." I folded my hands neatly on the table. "Meaning?" "Meaning," he said carefully. "We are prepared to offer you the full triple severance package immediately. Additionally, the board would like to formally apologize for the situation you endured." I sat very still. It was what I had expected, but hearing it out loud brought a different weight. "And Mr. Ramsey?" I asked. Mr. Lowe hesitated, then said, "Pending further review, he has been placed on administrative leave. If additional misconduct surfaces during our internal audit, and it seems likely it will, further action will be taken." Meaning termination, meaning reputation damage, meaning consequences. It was not vengeance I felt. It was justice, slow, deliberate, earned. I inclined my head slightly. "I accept the settlement, under the condition that any non-disclosure agreement attached to it cannot prohibit me from speaking truthfully if subpoenaed or required by law." Mr. Lowe blinked, surprised by my preparedness, then nodded. "That's reasonable. I'll make sure it's written accordingly." We shook hands. Firm, professional. As I left the conference room, the tension in the office felt heavier than ever. People were pretending to work, but their ears strained for scraps of news. Claire Myers caught my eye as I passed her desk. She mouthed, "Good for you." I smiled. A real smile this time. That night, I poured myself a glass of red wine and sat on my balcony under the stars. I thought about all the times I had bitten my tongue, endured slights, swallowed disrespect because I believed loyalty was always rewarded. And I thought about how wrong that belief had been, but how right it felt to finally stand up, not with anger, but with evidence, with dignity. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more fallout. But tonight, I had won something far greater than money. I had won back myself. The next morning, the office felt different again. There was a new vacancy in the atmosphere, like a heavy chair had been pulled away from the table. Owen's office remained dark. His nameplate was still there, but it looked fragile now, temporary, like someone might come any moment to scrape it off with a pocket knife. I worked quietly at my desk, tying up the last loose ends from my accounts, preparing the final transition notes I knew they would need. Some part of me still wanted to leave things better than I found them, even after everything. At mid-morning, Mr. Godfrey himself came to see me. Not a summons, not a scheduled meeting. He walked over, past the curious stares of staff, and stood by my desk like any ordinary visitor. "Ms. Brooks," he said, voice steady, "would you join me for a moment?" I nodded, setting aside my folder, and followed him to the smaller executive conference room. Inside were only two people, Mr. Lowe, and surprisingly, Mrs. Durant from operations. She offered me a small, almost private smile. "We wanted to inform you directly," Mr. Godfrey said, taking a seat, "that Mr. Ramsey has submitted his resignation, effective immediately." I blinked once, not because it surprised me, but because it happened faster than I thought. "He was advised," Mr. Lowe said delicately, "that if he did not resign voluntarily, the board would pursue termination for cause, based on multiple failures to follow protocol and risk management procedures. Translation: resign now or leave in disgrace." "Additionally," Mrs. Durant added, her voice firm, "we want you to know that the company has initiated a full review of our internal training and leadership practices. Your situation revealed larger issues we must address." I inclined my head, absorbing it. It was more than I had expected, more than most women in my position ever got. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. Mr. Godfrey folded his hands. "You've conducted yourself with more grace and professionalism than many would have, Ms. Brooks. The board is grateful." I let the words settle, not out of vanity, but out of a deep, clean sense of closure. As I stood to leave, Mr. Lowe said, "There's one more thing." He handed me a cream-colored envelope. Inside was a formal letter, an invitation to consult on the new ethics and leadership program they were building. Part-time, advisory role, good pay, full independence. My chest tightened, not because I needed it. I didn't. But because it was an acknowledgement that experience was not something to discard. It was something to honor. "I'll think about it," I said with a small smile. Walking back to my desk felt lighter. My resignation letter was already typed and saved. I would submit it tomorrow, on my own terms, not because someone pushed me out, but because I chose a different path. At noon, I passed Owen's now empty office. The blinds were pulled open. The desk was bare. A cleaning crew moved quietly inside, wiping away fingerprints. There was no announcement, no farewell speech, no sympathy, just absence. And sometimes, absence says everything. The day after Owen's resignation, I sat at my desk for the final time, staring at the blank resignation email saved in my drafts. It felt strange, the idea of leaving after so many years. Not pushed out, not broken down, but walking away by choice. Part of me had feared I might feel grief, or even bitterness. But sitting there, breathing in the ordinary morning smells of cheap coffee and toner, all I felt was clarity. At 10 sharp, I clicked send. Simple. Director, respectful. Chairman Godfrey responded within 20 minutes with a message thanking me for my years of service and wishing me well in whatever I chose to do next. I logged off my computer, tucked my few personal items into a small bag, and stood quietly, looking around the office one last time. It looked so much smaller than it once had. On my way out, several coworkers, ones who had once barely acknowledged me, stopped to shake my hand. One of them was Victor Langston, a senior logistics coordinator who had joined the firm about 2 years ago. He was younger, ambitious, always polite but distant. Today, he looked almost thoughtful. "You taught us something, Lillian," he said simply. "Thank you?" I smiled. A real smile, one without apology. "Take care of each other," I said. Outside, the spring air was brisk and clean. A slight breeze carried the scent of new grass, and something else. Something I hadn't realized I missed until now. Freedom. I walked 2 blocks to the cafe, where I had met with my first client years ago, the same place I had celebrated my first promotion, my 10th anniversary with the company, the first big account I landed on my own. I ordered a cup of black coffee and sat near the window, letting the sunlight warm my face. Across from me sat a woman around my age, gray streaks softening her dark hair. She wore a navy blazer and sneakers, typing furiously into a laptop. Her phone buzzed twice, and she ignored it. Work pulsed off her in waves. For a moment, I wondered what her story was, what battles she had fought behind polite smiles and quiet competence. We are everywhere, I thought. Women like me, working twice as hard for half the recognition, carrying the weight of other people's mistakes on our backs, because it is easier than making a scene. But not anymore. Not for me. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Durant. "We'd like to schedule a meeting next week to discuss the ethics program design. Your input would mean a great deal to us." I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding. "I'll be there." I wasn't finished yet. Maybe my chapter at Winslow and Cornell had ended, but my voice, the voice they once tried to silence, was only getting louder. And now they were listening. The following Monday, I returned to Winslow and Cornell, not as an employee, but as a consultant. It felt strange walking through the familiar lobby without a badge clipped to my lapel, without a computer bag slung over my shoulder. I had spent so many years moving through this building as a piece of its machinery, reliable and unseen. Now, I moved through it like a guest. Margaret at the reception desk gave me a warm smile as I signed in. "They're expecting you upstairs, Ms. Brooks," she said, her voice filled with something between admiration and relief. I nodded, tucking the visitor's badge into my jacket pocket. Upstairs, the large conference room had been repurposed. Gone were the endless spreadsheets and quarterly target charts. In their place were large whiteboards filled with words like accountability, transparency, and respect. It almost made me smile. Almost. Mrs. Durant greeted me at the door. She wore a dark green suit and a pin with the company's logo on her lapel. Behind her stood two younger managers, neither of whom I recognized. Fresh faces, new energy. "Lillian," Mrs. Durant said warmly, "thank you for coming." I shook her hand firmly. "Thank you for asking." We settled around the table, notebooks and pens in hand. "We're serious about change," she said after a moment. "Real change, not window dressing." I believed her. Or at least, I believed she wanted to believe herself. She outlined the basics: an internal review process for management behavior, anonymous reporting tools, a restructured HR department, mandatory leadership training sessions. All good ideas. Ideas that should have been implemented years ago. When she finished, she turned to me. "And you, Lillian? What would you change first?" I took a moment to think, not because I didn't have answers, but because I had so many. "When someone walks into this building," I said slowly, "they should know, not hope, but know, that they will be seen. That their voice matters. Whether they're a brand new intern or a woman who's been here 15 years. One of the younger managers, a woman named Bethany Cooper, nodded eagerly. "We've started working on a mentorship program, too, for junior staff." "That's good," I said. "But mentorship isn't just about teaching skills. It's about making sure the people you mentor survive long enough to thrive." Mrs. Durant's smile tightened slightly, but she nodded. We spent 2 hours working through practical steps, policies, training modules, communication plans. I saw real effort in the room. Imperfect, tentative, but sincere. And when I left that day, walking back out into the spring sunshine, I realized something important. I didn't need to stay in the company to change it. I had already changed it by standing up, by refusing to disappear quietly, by forcing a reckoning they could no longer ignore. A few blocks away, I stopped at a bookstore. I wandered the aisles aimlessly, letting my mind breathe. In the self-help section, I caught sight of a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, clutching a book about surviving toxic workplaces. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the back cover. I almost walked past her. Almost. Instead, I reached into my bag, pulled out one of the training manuals we had drafted that morning, a copy meant for future hires, and slipped it onto the shelf beside her. A small, silent gift. Hope tucked between pages. As I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some battles you win loudly. Others you win simply by surviving long enough to leave the door open for the next woman who needs it. The next few weeks moved like water slipping over stones. Steady, inevitable. I consulted twice a week, sometimes from home, sometimes in the new, brighter training spaces the company had established. Each time I returned, the faces around the building seemed different. More open, less guarded. New names appeared on emails. Fresh interns bustled in and out with wide eyes and fast steps, no longer shadowed by the silent fear that once clung to the walls like mildew. And yet, I kept a careful distance. This was not my home anymore. One afternoon, after a workshop, Bethany Cooper, the young manager from operations, caught up to me in the hallway. "Ms. Brooks," she said breathless, "could I ask, why did you stay so long before speaking up? I mean, if you don't mind sharing?" Her question wasn't judgmental. It was earnest, hungry for understanding. I thought for a moment, looking at her young, open face. "Because for a long time, I believed good work spoke for itself," I said. "Because I thought if I stayed loyal, the system would be loyal back." I smiled, bittersweet. "And because sometimes, when you're busy surviving, you forget you're allowed to fight for more." Bethany's eyes glistened. She nodded once, tightly, like she was memorizing the answer. I didn't add more. She would learn the rest in her own time, in her own battles. After our conversation, I gathered my things and made my way outside. The sun was setting low, spilling gold across the sidewalks. A group of young women in business clothes laughed together as they crossed the street, notebooks tucked under their arms. I stood still for a long moment, just watching. It was not a perfect world. It never would be. But something had shifted. A crack in the old walls where sunlight could finally pour in. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. A few weeks later, my consulting contract officially ended. There was no grand farewell, no speeches, just a simple handshake from Mrs. Durant, a few handwritten thank you notes from the training team, and a final walk through the halls I had once known so well. It was enough. That evening, I packed up my home office, the files, the binders, the notes, and tucked them neatly into a single cardboard box. I didn't feel sadness as I closed the lid. I felt completion. I wasn't the same woman who had quietly absorbed insults in glass-walled offices. I wasn't the assistant who stayed silent when overlooked, believing that hard work alone would speak loudly enough. I was Lillian Brooks, and I had spoken. Outside, the spring air smelled of rain and new beginnings. I walked to the small park near my apartment, carrying a worn leather notebook tucked under my arm. The same notebook where I had once written lists of tasks, schedules, client notes. Tonight, I wrote something different. A letter. To myself. I wrote about the woman I had been when I first walked into Winslow and Colonel 15 years ago. Young, eager, grateful for every crumb of recognition. I wrote about the woman I had become. Steady, resilient, quietly fierce. And I wrote about the woman I was becoming still. Someone who no longer needed anyone's permission to be visible. When I finished, I tucked the letter into the roots of an old oak tree in the park, pressed there by my own hands, a promise planted in the earth. Nearby, a group of teenagers laughed too loudly. A mother pushed a stroller over the cracked sidewalk. Life moved on, indifferent and glorious. I smiled. In the end, Owen Ramsey's mistake wasn't just underestimating me. It was never bothering to learn what loyalty built over time could really do. He thought firing me would erase me. Instead, it made me unforgettable. And somewhere, in some office yet unseen, another young woman was pulling herself a little taller, speaking a little louder, daring to be seen, because a door had been left open, because someone had shown it was possible. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but powerfully. And sometimes that's more than enough.